Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell here with attorney Victor Pena. And Victor, I'm glad we're going to have the opportunity to discuss one of your recent appeal victories, this time against MetLife. I know you've handled a couple hundred cases against MetLife, but this one was interesting because it was a two-level appeal, and another lawyer had the claim in the first appeal, and then they fortunately found you. But what I'd like you to do is go through the history of this claim, what the person's medical condition was, and their occupation, and the type of disability, and then what you were able to do for this client in order to be successful.
Okay. Well, Greg, this client, he contacted me obviously after he received several denial letters from MetLife. Before he went on disability, he'd been working as a production supervisor for a large, well-known, heavy-duty automotive component manufacturer. He worked the floor. His job obviously required him, to be physically capable of lifting a certain amount of weight. He was standing a lot, climbing, working with tools. But he had a number of conditions. He had several.
So what was his job classification?
They classified it during their vocational assessment as light-duty occupation.
Okay.
Yeah. So
is that what you were trying to prove, that he couldn't do light duty?
Yes, basically. So
Okay.
the interesting part in this case is that there were two, as you mentioned, there were two different denials. So MetLife, they usually just have one level of appeals, unlike some other insurance companies can sometimes provide two, but they usually provide one. So here, MetLife actually provided two. The reason was during the initial denial, they reviewed the medical records. They found that his numerous conditions, he had PTSD, he had back conditions, he had carpal tunnel syndrome, some knee injuries. They found that the medical records failed to support a functional impairment that would prevent him from working in his own occupation. So he had hired a different attorney before finding us that handled his appeal for him. Unfortunately, the appeal was denied, but it was denied for a different reason. They said now there is a support for a functional impairment, however, an exclusion applies because his PTSD was service-connected. He had been in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of his conditions, and he basically resulted from his service that they were subject to the war exclusion. So since they were service-connected, they were out. So they gave him the opportunity to file a second appeal since it was a different reason for denying the second time around. At that point, his attorney at the time washed his hands of the claim, and he was forced to find another attorney. Despite the difficulty, we obviously took on the case. Because of his service, I mean, the appeal prep, all of it, became basically a matter of combing through the medical records, figuring out which conditions would be outside the scope of that exclusion. We also set up a functional capacity evaluation for him just to avoid MetLife basically coming back with one of their standard denials that there's no objective medical evidence in the file. So
Right.
we submitted all of that. Luckily, they agreed, although they initially denied to review that second appeal with the caveat that they were just going to review the mental health and how it related to the exclusion. We submitted all the physical, and they agreed to review everything. So they reviewed all of the medical evidence, and then shortly after, we did get an approval letter overturning the denial.
So this was an extremely difficult claim because we see a lot where we have the service-connected disabilities, and they basically say if it was caused while you were engaged in some type of, well, you had a nuance in this one because
Right.
it's more when you're engaged in activities of war.
Right.
So like when this person was in Iraq versus if you're engaged in just regular training, right? And so why is that distinguishable?
Well, in this, the way the exclusion was defined is it basically required the condition to be, he had to have sustained the condition, or it has to result from an injury that he sustained while at war. He actually had one injury that was to his knee that he sustained during training exercises before. It wasn't actually during war. So that was one of the things that we argued in the appeal. They agreed, so they reviewed. So we were able to get a lot of those conditions that they initially classified within the exclusion outside the scope of that exclusion, and eventually it was successful.
And were you able to work closely with his treating doctors in order to distinguish what was service-related versus what was not service-related?
Right. The interesting thing here, he had been approved immediately by the VA for his service-connected conditions. He had been approved actually immediately from the Social Security Administration for his conditions too. But then when he didn't encounter trouble until he came to MetLife. So I guess the biggest thing, we did the functional capacity evaluations. We were able to have his doctors review that report and kind of correlate that with the medical records that were available at the time. and it was successful.
So do you think that securing the functional capacity exam in this particular claim was the key to your success?
I think it played a vital part, just mainly because initially they said that there was no support. After reviewing the file, there was a substantial amount of medical records. They had an independent physical or physician consultant actually review the file. They disagreed. They felt that there wasn't, despite all of the evidence in the file, they felt that it didn't support a functional impairment. But it's hard to argue with a functional capacity evaluation. In this case, it was really good.
In this case, this particular claimant had been denied, and then another lawyer did the appeal. So by the time you got hired, how many months had gone by since he was paid benefits?
A lot of time had gone by, actually. That was one of the concerns initially, since it's kind of hard to tie back new evidence. Like a functional capacity evaluation would obviously establish and show his condition and his functional limitations today.
Right.
But they denied him back in early 2016. So we actually, without being able to tie that back with the help of his doctor that had been treating him at the time, I don't think we would have had the same result.
So that was a key element, that even though you did the functional capacity exam, had that requested, and that was a year after he was initially eligible for benefits, you had to make sure that his treating doctor tied that back to say that these functional limitations and restrictions would have been in existence 1 year earlier.
Correct.
Okay. Well, if you've had a claim with MetLife or any other long-term disability insurance carrier, please give Victor a call or any of our other long-term disability insurance attorneys. We always offer a free initial consultation. We're able to let you know right away via telephone consultation if we're able to assist you. And we represent clients throughout the country. We look forward to the opportunity to speak with you.